How's it going, everyone? Marriland here, and that's right, you are indeed looking at a Sylveon and a Pangoro, and they look like they're about to battle. Well, do you know why that is? Well, that's because these are theme decks, pre-constructed theme decks for the Pokemon Trading Card Game. Now, I'll tell you right now, if you're an advanced player of the trading card game, this probably isn't the video for you, because I'm going to go over some of the basics of the trading card game, because these are pre-constructed theme decks. We all know what's inside. There's no real level of mystery here unless you haven't seen them before. So it's not quite like a booster box, although I will be doing another one of those. However, one thing really quick, before all you advanced players run off and are like, wait, this isn't a booster box opening video. Well, I will be doing one to coincide with another giveaway I'm doing over on Marriland.com. From now until October 6th, you can head on over to Marriland.com and enter for a chance to win a set of these and a booster box of the newest set, XY Furious Fists. Oh yeah, it's gonna be really cool. There is a link in the description to take you right to where you need to go. And this is great for you newer players too, because it gives you a chance to win these. So definitely check that out. But anyway, I think it's time to take a look at these two theme decks. What do you say? And just kind of go over the Pokemon Trading Card Game. So first and foremost, the one with the Sylveon is called Enchanted Echo. Echo. No, I did that echo. But yeah, it features Sylveon, as you can see here. And then there's this one with Pangoro, or Pangoro, I guess as it's called. And it is called Dark Hammer. So each of these theme decks, they feature a Pokemon on the front, and they also have different energy types. As you can see, Enchanted Echo has Fairy and Grass types, while Dark Hammer has Fighting and Dark types. Well, that seems appropriate. So these come actually with a pre-constructed deck, as I kind of mentioned. In fact, even on the outside, you can see what's inside of the deck to kind of give you an idea of what's going on here. Since Fairy energy are rather difficult to obtain, going with the Sylveon deck isn't a bad choice, but also the Darkness energy in the Dark Hammer deck's pretty cool too. So I'm not entirely sure which one of these is better, so only one way to find out. Let's open them both up. So again, this is going to kind of be geared towards newer players. I'm not going to explain everything about the trading card game, but I will show you some of the basics in case you're totally clueless about how to play and you just want somewhat of an idea. There are rules in here, or at least there should be. I'm trying to figure out what the most efficient way to open this would be. I guess probably from up here. Maybe there's a better way and I just don't know it. I do see a little opening down here on the bottom, but it doesn't seem to be any better. Sometimes the packaging can be interesting. Let's try it from this side. Yeah, it's a little bit of a pain to open, but it's fine. Okay, so let's see. Man, we're just decimating this poor box. I'm not too used to opening these kind of boxes, that's for sure, but I think it'll be kind of fun. So what do you get in here, inside of this theme deck? Well, it comes in this kind of plastic case thing to hold everything together. And it includes a play mat, which you can kind of see there. It includes a coin. And it includes that ultra cool Sylveon. Now that will go in your deck, which is kind of nice. Look nice and pretty. Also be pretty effective too. That's not all this comes with. There's a bunch of other stuff. So this is a play mat. If you're a newer player, you're definitely going to want to use this. This nice Xerneas and Yveltal playmat, that's a more advanced kind of one. It doesn't have like the spots to place everything, but it's still really cool. Now what is this thing, you might ask? Well, this is what you use to keep track of how much damage your Pokemon cards have received. They're always in increments of 10. So there's also 50 damage counters, and then 100. There's a 100 damage counter here because damage can actually get that high. Additionally, this one here, this is a burn marker, and then this one over here is a poison marker. You use those to indicate whether your Pokemon has been burned or poisoned, sort of like in the video game. So I'm going to set this right there for right now. You can also find here this little insert thing. It tells you what is new in the Pokemon TCG Furious Fists expansion. So, basically talks about Pokemon-EX and stuff, and Mega Evolution Pokemon, things of the like. There's also a very nice little set list here, which you can use for collecting. Some cards are only available in the standard version, but as you can see, there's like red, that indicates it's a normal foil, and then there's these blue ones here, which indicate it's a reverse foil, or reverse holo, or parallel set as they call it. So that's kind of neat. As for the instructions, those are, I think, found online nowadays. You can find them on Pokemon.com. But here's a look at this playmat. I don't think I'll be able to show the entire playmat here, but let me just see if I can give you a little sneak preview. Yeah, they have pretty good little like instruction guide here, which will give you a little bit of an overview of what's up. But you know what? I'm not going to spend too much time on that. I'll go over the basics, but all right, I'm just gonna get rid of this thing. Okay, there we go. So you also get this cool little deck box thing. It doesn't fit any sleeves in there, and those are very important. You may notice that oftentimes I put little card sleeves on my cards to protect them. Well, if you have 60 of them, you can sleeve your deck, as it's called, and that will keep your cards protected while you shuffle them. You also get a cool coin. Hey, it's heads, that's awesome. And you even get a special code in here, which can be used to get this deck on the trading card game online, actually. There is a code card on here. I'm going to save it for later, though. But this is what you get when you open up one of these decks. So you can play online as well. However, I do think you get like a free deck or something online, so it's not necessary to play online. So let's see what's inside of the Enchanted Echo deck. Did you hear an echo? I didn't. All right, so inside of this nice little deck, we have all sorts of cards. Now, these are all randomly shuffled, which is kind of nice, actually. Seems like usually they aren't, or at least in the past they didn't used to be. However, it'll make kind of showing what's inside a little difficult. So I do have the deck list over on the side I'll reference. But a good way to get started is by understanding that there are, well, 3 main types of Pokemon cards. When you think of a Pokemon card, you might think, well, it's a Pokemon, right? What's this thing? What is this? A trainer? I don't need a trainer, I want Pokemon cards, right? Well, this is still really important too. Trainer cards help you do things, which is handy. And then you also need these cards. These are called energy cards. These are what allow your Pokemon to use attacks. Because you may notice, if you've ever seen a Pokemon card, you'll probably see it has different attacks. And again, if you're familiar with the card game, this should be no shock to you. But I know a lot of people aren't familiar with it and would like to kind of know, what am I looking at? Well, this Bellsprout, it has 50 hit points, which you can see in the top right corner. Remember these little damage counters? That means it can have 4 of these on it and still be out. Once it takes that 5th damage counter, the 50 hit points, well, then it's knocked out, and you draw a prize card for that. The goal of the game is to knock out essentially 6 Pokemon, because you need to claim 6 prize cards. Prize cards come from your own deck. They don't come from the opponent's deck, so you're not taking their cards if you win. You're just sort of unlocking cards that were set aside at the very beginning of the game. That's sort of how you keep track of score. Certain Mega Pokemon, or Pokemon-EX, they let you draw 2 prize cards when they're knocked out as well. So that's a Pokemon, and a basic Pokemon at that. In fact, before I go on to trainer cards, let me just go over 1 or 2 more things here. Notice how it's green? Well, that indicates that it's a grass type. In Pokemon, there are, I think, 10 or 11 different types. There's not all of the types. For instance, ice is missing, poison is missing, flying, that's also missing. But they're oftentimes merged together with other types. So Bellsprout is a grass type in this case. In the top left corner, you can see that Bellsprout is a basic Pokemon. that means it's an unevolved Pokemon. You can just set this down. In fact, you need to have basic Pokemon in order to play the game, because you have to evolve them by getting stage 1 Pokemon, which is the first evolution, and then stage 2. You place each evolution onto the Pokemon. However, it has to have been in play for a turn. Again, I'm not going over like an actual play game thing, like a battle or whatever you call it, but this is just sort of an idea of how it works. Then down here, see how it has 1 grass energy and Vine Whip for 10. So in case you figure that out, if you attach this energy to your Bellsprout, and you usually would put it behind just like that, so you can see the energy in the corner, then at the end of your turn, you can say, I use Vine Whip, and it'll do 10 damage. So Sling does 10 damage. Guess what? You take one of these, and then, boom, you do 10 damage. Now, you don't do the damage to yourself. You would do the damage to your opponent's card that's on the other side of the field, like over here. For instance, this Sylveon, you do 10 damage for that. You need to have a grass energy on it in order to do that attack, though, because see how it says Vine Whip for 10 and it costs 1 grass? But then there's also that second move. You might see that weird kind of white star symbol. So in the trading card game, that's called colorless. That means you can actually use any energy type to provide colorless. So this would work to use knockoff. You could put a grass and a fairy energy on it. You can only attach 1 energy per turn unless there's some sort of a card effect that would prevent you, or would allow you to do more than just 1 per turn. But this would let me use knockoff, and it lets me discard a random card from your opponent's hand. Hopefully you can see that all right. So you start the game with 7 cards in your hand, you draw a card each turn. A lot of different trainer cards let you draw cards as well, and being able to draw cards is very helpful in the trading card game. So that's why discarding a random card, you know, it's like, oh, well, that kind of hurts their setup, and being random, you know, could be interesting. Could be interesting indeed. So speaking of trainer cards, you know what? I'm going to show you several different types. In fact, I think there's just 2 types in here, but that's fine. We'll just go over these really quick. So I'm going to show you a little bit about trainers and their subtypes. So this one here, see how in this corner it says item? Well, that means you can play any number of these during your turn. Because both of these are trainer cards, but see how they have different text in the top right corner? This one says supporter, this one says item. Items can be played as often as you like during your turn. Whereas supporters here, they're usually more powerful in their effects. They can only be played once during your turn. It even says so right down there. You can only play 1 supporter card during your turn. So you can play any number of item cards, but only 1 supporter per turn. And the supporters usually have more effects that are more useful. But that's not to say that item cards are worthless either. In this case, the potion, this allows you to heal 30 damage from one of your Pokemon. That's kind of handy, actually. I mean, it's not a great card as you get further on in the game because you're dealing with well over 100 hit points for stuff. But early on, this is kind of a nifty card if you're playing with pre-constructed decks, because you know how I did 10 damage to that Sylveon there? Well, let's say Sylveon healed itself. You use a potion during your turn, you get to take that damage off. In fact, you could take up to 3 damage off of one of your Pokemon. So that's cool. You just play it, and then it hits the discard pile, which is right beneath your deck. Again, I'm not going to show an actual game in action right now, unless you guys are interested. I mean, you know, let me know. Maybe I can just do a demonstration fight sometime. But yeah, and then the Battle Reporter. This lets you draw cards until you have the same number of cards in your hand as your opponent. So very useful for drawing cards. If your opponent has a lot of cards in their hand, it lets you draw more, which is kind of neat. This also comes in handy with a really cool card in this deck. So speaking of the deck, let's go ahead and put it all together here. There are a few different evolution lines in this deck. Sylveon is obviously one of them, and one of the more powerful evolution lines. We also have Bellsprout, a whole bunch of fairy energy. We have Eevee there. I'll show the trainers later on. I actually have no clue why the Slackoth is in here. This is the really good card, the Tornadus, because it works very well. Oh, there's a Vigoroth. I wasn't sure if there would be or not. All right, and then we have Clefairy, and we have Victory Bell, Bellsprout, Noibat. Do we have Noivern in here? No, it looks like just Noibat, which is really a shame. And we also have Shelmet. No! Eevee! So, you don't want to just run one of every single Pokemon in your deck. You're actually a lot better off running several, because you're going to need them. Because remember, if your opponent knocks one out, it's discarded, and you don't usually have a way to get it back. So being able to make sure if one's prized, for instance, in your 6 prize cards, you have another one that you're able to get, or if one gets knocked out, you're able to get it too. So I think I have all of the unique cards in here other than the trainers. So let's take a look at what some of these Pokemon do in the Enchanted Echo deck. So obviously this deck is themed around Sylveon. In fact, I have this really nice fancy Sylveon here. You do get 2 Sylveons in your deck, and you get 4 Eevees, which is fun. So this Sylveon has 90 hit points. It's a stage 1, meaning you actually would place this Sylveon on top of your Eevee. It needs to be out for 1 turn before you can evolve it, normally. However, Eevee has a really cool ability. So remember I was telling you about the different attacks and stuff? Well, there are these things called abilities that are basically an effect that triggers whenever you meet a certain condition. Or sometimes you can use them once per turn or something. In the case of Eevee, you have Energy Evolution. And whenever you attach a basic energy card from your hand to this Pokemon, and a basic energy card is anything without any other text on it, there are certain special energy cards that are available. However, you can only have 4 of those in your deck total, whereas you can have any number of these, up to 60. Because remember, well, I guess you couldn't have 60 energy in your deck. Your deck comprises of exactly 60 cards, unless you're playing in a pre-release, where it's 40. You need to have energy, you need to have Pokemon. You don't need to have trainers. In fact, actually, I guess you don't need to have energy either, but you do need to have at least a basic Pokemon. Anyway, the ability, whenever you attach one of those basic energy cards from your hand, you can search your deck that evolves from this Pokemon that is the same type as that energy card and put it onto that Pokemon. So, with this Eevee, if I attached a basic Fairy energy to the Eevee, then I could search through my deck that turn and actually break that evolution rule where you have to wait a turn. You can, because the ability says it lets you do that. So, you would search through your deck and you would put this Sylveon card right on top of it right away. If you have it in your hand, you can't just place it down, unfortunately, so it's a shame if you get stuck with it in your hand. Although there are 2, so it shouldn't really be a problem. And then you can attack right away. As you can see, for 1 Fairy energy, it does Curly Ribbon for 30. And you move an energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon to one of their benched Pokemon. So in the Pokemon Trading Card Game, how it works, you always are fighting with 1 active Pokemon. That's the one that's up front. That's the one that's able to use its attacks and stuff. It's generally the one that will receive damage when you use an attack. So that's kind of cool. But you can also have up to 5 benched Pokemon. These are placed sort of behind all of the other Pokemon. So like if I had the Sylveon right here, I know there's a mess of cards, but if I had that here, they'd be kind of down here in this area. You can attach energy to them. You can evolve them if they've been out for 1 turn, or if they're like Eevee and you can use the ability. You can use abilities on benched Pokemon, unless it says it has to be active. But you just can't attack with them during your turn. They're sort of like backups, and they're very handy to have. But anyway, Curly Ribbon is nice because it does pretty good damage, especially if you can get this setup on the first turn. Actually, you only need these 2 on the first turn, so because then you get a search for Sylveon. And moving the energy, that slows them down, because remember, you need to have energy in order to attack. So if you keep moving your opponent's energy somewhere else from their active Pokemon, well, guess what? They're not going to be able to attack now. So that's why Curly Ribbon's kind of handy. Additionally, Sylveon has a cool echoed voice attack, appropriate for Enchanted Echo. For 1 fairy energy and then 2 of any other kind of energy, it does 50 damage. Plus, during your next turn, this Pokemon's echoed voice attack does 50 more damage. Now, it doesn't keep stacking, but you use this once, and then it does 50 damage. Then, the next time you use it, as long as this Pokemon here, Sylveon, is still your active Pokemon and it hasn't gone anywhere, it'll do 100 damage. And then, if you use it again on the next turn, it'll do 100 damage again. It doesn't keep stacking to like 150 and then 200 because it's 50 plus 50 all the time. It's not 50 plus whatever last turn was. But still, that's nice. 100 damage for 3 energy. You just have to start the echoed voice and then it echoes like crazy. So that's a pretty cool combo with this deck. Additionally, you could attach a grass energy to Eevee on the first turn instead. And you know what? There is a Leafeon in this deck. There's only 1 Leafeon in this deck. You could add more if you'd like. In fact, you can add to your deck anything you get from booster packs. Well, at least that's modified legal, as they call it. You can't use really old cards in tournaments nowadays, but, you know, that's fine. So, what this Leafeon does, it does 30 damage, and then your opponent's active Pokemon is now asleep. So, asleep is a status condition, sort of like burn and poison that I was telling you earlier. When your Pokemon is asleep, between turns, you have to flip a coin to see if it wakes up. If it's heads, it wakes up, and then it's not asleep anymore. It can do everything. It doesn't fall back asleep. If it's tails, though, you leave it flipped to the side like this, because asleep Pokemon are always faced counterclockwise here. So I always say asleep, you know, A, and then there's confused, C, which is down. It would be upside down if you're confused, and then paralyzed, or P, which is that way. Always the order of the letters as I look at it. When you're asleep, you can't attack, you can't retreat. And retreating, by the way, that means moving your active Pokemon to the bench and then sending out a new one. You have to pay, though, however many energy it says down there for your retreat cost. Also, while I'm down here, you can see a weakness and a resistance. That means whenever a fire-type Pokemon hits Leafeon, it will do twice as much damage as usual. So if it would do 30 damage, it now does 60 damage to Leafeon. As for Sylveon over here, well, it's weak to metal or steel. I know the type is called steel in the video games, but it's called metal in the trading card game for some reason. And then it's also resistant to dark, or darkness, as it's also called in the trading card game. Now, the resistance is minus 20 in this case. So that means it just takes 20 damage less than it would. It's not half like in the video game, it's 20 damage less. So yeah, Soothing Sense, not too bad if you can get it out first turn. And let's say you have a fairy energy and a grass energy when you start, well, it gives you an option if you want to evolve into Leafeon or Sylveon. In fact, you can add the other evolutions in if you like. And then it has Magical Leaf, so it does 50 damage, but see there's a little plus sign next to it. So for 1 grass, 2 of anything, you flip a coin. If heads, the attack does 30 more damage, and you heal 30 damage from this Pokemon. So it hits for 80 damage, plus you heal a bit, and that's kind of nice to be able to heal. So yeah, kind of cool combo here. That's what the evolution line's going for. You got Leafeon and Sylveon. Now if you wanted to expand, you could put in other evolutions if you'd like, although typically you want to stick to no more than 2 different types of energy. So this deck plays Fairy Energy and Grass Energy. Okay, so that's the Eevee line. That sounds pretty good. Now let's move on to the Clefable line. So again, in the Pokemon trading card games, you oftentimes have lines of things. So, for instance, in this deck there are 2 Clefairies and 2 Clefables. So you're running a 2-2 line, as it's oftentimes referred to. You don't usually want to do a 1-1 line unless it's like some weird thing. And you don't want to do like a 1-2 line. You don't need 2 Clefables when you have only 1 Clefairy, unless it's at a pre-release or something, and then you could almost justify it. But yeah, so this is a 2-2 line in the deck. I only have the 1 here because that's all we really need, just to show you what it does. Clefairy is really basic. 60 hit points, fairy type. For 1 colorless, you heal 30 damage from this Pokemon, so it doesn't really do any damage, but it can take a few early hits and then just heal it off. Now that's one of anything. You can use any different type of energy. So if I had a grass energy, I could use that. That's how colorless works. Some energy provide colorless energy. There's none in this deck that do, but you will occasionally see things like a double colorless energy. It doesn't work the other way around. For instance, if I had one of those double colorless energy things, I could use that to pay for Echoed Voice, but I couldn't use that to pay for Curly Ribbon. It only provides colorless energy. So it's useful for moves like this, where, you know, you have a fairy energy and then you can put 2 colorless energy, but it doesn't provide any energy of a certain color. That's how colorless energy works. I know a lot of people get really confused about that early on. They think it's a wild card. It's only a wild card if it's on an attack like this. But really, Clefairy just has Pound for 20. So not really a great card to use until you evolve it. And even once you evolve it, which you have to leave it on your bench or in your active position for at least 1 turn, and then play the Clefable card from your hand onto it. That's how evolutions work. But yeah, once you've evolved it, for 1 colorless, it has Follow Me. And that lets you switch one of your opponent's bench Pokemon with one of your opponent's active Pokemon. Or with your opponent's active, I'm sorry. So that means you choose one of your opponent's bench Pokemon, and then they bring it out active. Sometimes this is worded differently. Sometimes it's switch one of your opponent's bench Pokemon, or one of your opponent's active with one of their bench, or your opponent switches it. If it says your opponent switches, then they get to make the choice of who comes up from the bench. If it says you switch it, or switch one of, then you get to choose. And in this case, you get to choose. So that's kind of nice. It lets you set something up, or lock something up in their active position. Now it also, for 1 fairy energy and 1 colorless energy, has Moonblast, which does 30 damage, so it's not a lot of damage, but during your opponent's next turn, any damage done by attacks from the defending Pokemon, and by the way, the defending Pokemon is what you're fighting against, your opponent's active Pokemon. So it'd be like right up there, let's say. Whatever you're fighting against, it's reduced by 30. Now this is before applying weakness and resistance, so it's very handy if you're, you know, fighting against a steel type or something, or a metal type as they call it in the trading card game, because let's say it would do 60. Well, you reduce it by 30 before applying the weakness. So it'd just do 60 rather than like 90 or so. So that's kind of cool. So it's more about defense than offense, really. Probably one of the ones you'd want to replace as you get better cards, but it's certainly interesting. It's a fairy type. In fact, the only other fairy type in here, aside from Sylveon. So let's move on to the grass type cards. There are quite a few in here. The one that you'll probably want to take most note of is the whole Bellsprout line. So let me grab these really quick here, and let's take a look. So even though I have just the 4 here, it's actually a 3-2-1 line. Do you know what that means? Do you know what that means? That's right, 3 Bellsprout, 2 Weepin' Bell, and then 1 Victory Bell. That's generally okay. It's sort of like a pyramid line. Typically you'd want to go with like 2, 2, and 2, because usually having too much on the bottom doesn't really help. Maybe a 2, 1, 1 is fine. I don't know. It's difficult. You can also use this rare candy item, which lets you jump an evolution line. So you can go straight from Bellsprout to Victory Bell if you have that trainer card in your hand. So in that case, you'd play something like a 2-1-2, let's say. Okay, but let's go ahead and take a look at the Bellsprout line here. So this thing has 50 hit points. In fact, I actually showed you this already, so there's really no point in going over it again other than pointing out the fact that it has a fire weakness and 1 retreat cost. And then over here we have a Weepin' Bell, has more hit points, that's good, and more attacks. So both of these only take 1 grass energy. Then it takes either 1 or 2 of any other kind of energy. The first attack is Vine Whip, 1 grass, 1 colorless, and it just does 20. Nothing too much, but hey, you know what? Why not? Then, for a grass and 2 colorless, it has Spit Poison, which does 40 damage. However, it also has the effect where your opponent's active Pokemon is now poisoned. When a Pokemon is poisoned, it gets that cool little poison marker thing right here. That has to be placed right onto the card. It takes 10 damage in between turns. Now, specifically, this is 1 damage counter because some things say place a damage counter, and that's considered an effect, but most things do damage. Just for more advanced play, keep in mind that it's 1 damage counter, but it's essentially 10 damage between each turn. Now that's, at the end of your turn, so really this turns into 50, and then by the time your opponent's done with their turn, it'll have turned into 60, because they place 10 more damage between their turn and yours. So that's kind of cool. It's decent, let's just say. Still not the best card in the world by any means, but, you get this thing going turn 3, and it can do some damage. Alright, and then we have Victory Bell, so that's kind of handy. It's a stage 2, so it's a bit of a hassle to get because you need to have both the Bellsprout and the Weepin' Bell before it, in addition to the Victory Bell in your hand. It has an ability, remember I was telling you about those earlier. So once during your turn, you may discard a grass energy attached to this Pokemon. So you can even use this on the bench, by the way. So you could be fighting with Sylveon or Leafeon or something, and then just use this if you want. So you have to discard a grass energy attached to it. Again, you can only attach 1 energy per turn, so it kind of uses up your energy attachment. But if you do that, your opponent's active Pokemon is now confused and poisoned. So I just told you about poisoned, which is wonderful. Confused, they flip their card upside down, and then whenever they try to attack, they have to flip a coin. If they get tails with that coin flip, they do 3 damage counters to themselves. Or yeah, you know what I mean. They do 3 damage counters, which is essentially 30 damage. Again, it's damage counters, so you don't reduce the damage. That's why I pointed that out earlier, by the way. Some things let you prevent damage or reduce damage. Well, that doesn't work with damage counters like poison. Like, remember that Clefable? Wouldn't work to prevent poison damage. Just saying. So, on top of that, for 1 grass, 2 colorless, it has Spiral Drain, which does 60 damage, so pretty solid. At least, early on in your Pokemon Trading Card Game career. And you heal 30 damage from this Pokemon. So, you have Victory Bell out here, and it can actually stay out for a while because you do a moderate amount of damage, plus you keep healing. So if your opponent tries to fight you, it's not gonna do, well, I mean, it'll do as much, but you keep healing more. And if you use that potion, you heal even more. Yeah, I think that's kind of what they were going for with the theme of this deck. So Victory Bell is definitely another integral part of the Enchanted Echo deck. Now, we're running out of Pokemon here, but that's fine. Let's take a look at the other really good line in here. Or at least decent line, I guess. So we have Shelmet. Nothing really remarkable about this. It has a retreat cost of 3, though, so you gotta be careful that you don't need to get rid of this thing right away, because you probably won't be able to retreat it. At most, it only does 20 damage, so that's not a lot, but hey, you know what? Why not? But you can evolve it into Excelgor here. So for 1 of any type of energy, 1 colorless energy, it uses Raid, and it does 20 damage. But if this Pokemon evolved from Shelmet during this turn, this attack does 40 more damage. So that's 60 damage for 1 energy. That's not too bad. Yeah, that's not too bad at all. At least if you're starting out. Again, that's the scale I'm kind of talking about here. Once you start moving on to just Pokémon-EX cards, 60 damage, it's okay, but it's not great. But early on, this is certainly sufficient. Also, it has After Image Strike for 40. And then, if any damage is done to this Pokemon by attacks during your opponent's next turn, you flip a coin. If heads, you prevent that damage. So, after you use this move, then on the next turn, if your opponent tries to do something to damage you, you flip a coin, and if heads, you prevent all that damage. So, for instance, if you were to, fight that with the Victory Bell, let's say, that healed 30 damage from Victory Bell, you'd still do that, because you don't prevent everything of the attack. You just prevent any damage that Excelgor takes. Additionally, if this gets, poisoned or something, you don't prevent that, it's just the damage. but it's still all right. It also has free retreat. See how there's nothing in that retreat spot there? That means you can get rid of this thing without having to discard any energy. You can just send it back to your bench, let another Pokemon fight, and then you can send this out later on if you want. But yeah, that's Excelgor for you. So, the other evolution line we have, in fact, I think this is the last one in here, because I don't think Breloom is in here, and I don't think Noivern is. You might be able to get those if you open up booster packs, though. So we have Slackoth. This thing isn't really all that great. 60 hit points isn't too bad. Weakness to fighting kind of hurts because there's a lot of fighting types in Furious Fists, and that 3 retreat cost. For 2 colorless, it has a big yawn. Both active Pokemon are now asleep, so that means both Slackoth and the opponent's active Pokemon, they fall asleep, and then between turns, both of you have to flip to see if you wake up. You want to evolve it right away. So, you evolve it into Vigoroth here. Has 90 hit points, not too shabby, but the nice thing about Vigoroth, see those attacks? They use all colorless energy. So Vigoroth is a normal type in the video games, but it's considered a colorless type in the trading card game, which is great because that means you can put any type of energy on this to use its attacks. Additionally, that makes colorless Pokemon very easy to put into just about any deck, because you can put any energy on them. So, as you've probably seen, it has Scratch for 20, it's okay, and it also has Reckless Charge. So that's 3 of anything for 70 damage. Ooh, man. And then you flip a coin. If Tails, this Pokemon does 20 damage to itself. So yeah, you would actually do damage to yourself if you flip Tails. Now if you get Heads, it doesn't really do any damage to yourself, which is nice. But some attacks do damage yourself, and you have to be mindful of that. But any way you look at it, it's still pretty good. For this deck. So definitely you want to use that. Now I think you are running a 2-2 line if you get this deck. You have 2 Slackoth and 2 Vigoroth, which is pretty handy. Okay, now we have a few other just kind of random things. These are things that you can use to improve your deck later on, because you don't really have the evolution lines for them just yet. You just have the basic Pokemon. So there's Noibat and there's Shroomish. I don't really think I need to explain either of these two. They're really basic for their attacks. Noibat has a resistance to fighting, which is kind of cool. But that's about it there. Okay, last but not least, we have Tornadus here. Now this is definitely a good card for your deck. It's actually pretty strong as you get more cards too. So it has 110 hit points for being a basic Pokemon. That's amazing. For 2 colorless energy, it does 20 damage, so it's not amazing. And remember what I was telling you about that having the opponent switch thing? See how this one is worded? You may have your opponent switch one of his or her active Pokemon with one of his or her bench Pokemon. So you would do the 20 regardless of if the opponent switches. You only do it to the Pokemon that's active. Then they have the choice, your opponent has the choice, or actually no, I'm sorry. You have the choice of making them switch. You don't choose who they switch to because of how this is worded. Because it says you may, that means you don't have to, but if you want to, you can. And then have your opponent switch his or her active. So they get to choose who from their bench replaces the active. But yeah, that's why I was talking about that earlier. It also, this is the main attack you want to use, Twister Throw. So 3 colorless, 3 of anything for 60 damage on a basic Pokemon. That's really nice. But on top of that, if you have the same number of cards in your hand as your opponent, this attack does 60 more damage. So that's 3 for 120 damage. That's enough to knock out Tornadus, that's enough to knock out Sylveon, that's enough to knock out, I think, everything in this deck except for Victory Bell, and even then you're only 10 hit points shy. Yeah, Victory Bell has 130. So that's really strong. It also only has 1 retreat cost, and it has a nifty resistance to fighting. The weakness to electric kind of stinks though, but hey, it's not bad at all. Not bad at all. Now, how do you get the same number of cards in your hand as your opponent? Well, remember what I was talking about earlier with supporter cards? This guy sure helps, the Battle Reporter. You draw cards until you have, dun da da da, the same number of cards in your hand as your opponent. So as long as your opponent has more cards than you, because you don't get to discard cards if you have more. In fact, this can't even be played then. Yeah, then you can just use this and then go right for the attack. Just make sure you don't play anything after you draw this from your hand, because otherwise you wouldn't have the same number. But that's why this is in here. Definitely helpful. So I showed you the potion. Let's show you some of the other trainer cards in here. And, you know, I know this has been a bit long of a video, but I know a lot of people were really curious to kind of know some stuff about the trading card game, and hopefully this explains it fairly well. So, here's the maintenance. This is an item card, so you can play it in conjunction with other item cards, no problem. You can play as many as you want. You shuffle 2 cards from your hand into your deck, and then if you can't shuffle 2 into your deck, you can't play this card. So that's just more of a, hey, you can't, you know, just shuffle 1 in and sort of halfway complete this. You have to do 2. And then you draw a card. So I know it's like you put in 2, but you only get 1 back. But this is useful because sometimes you have cards in your hand that you don't want to use, and this lets you get something that might actually help you. And you can play as many of those as you like during your turn, which is also very handy, as opposed to being a supporter card, which you can only use 1 per turn. Let's see, you have 2 of those in your deck. You also have 2 potions and 2 of those battle reporters. In addition to that, you have 2 of these professor's letters here. And these are handy. Search your deck for up to 2 basic energy cards, reveal them, and put them into your hand. You then shuffle your deck afterwards. So that's a great way to get some energy for your Pokemon. It just has to be basic energy though. So if it says special energy anywhere on the card, you can't get it with that. Remember those double colorless I was telling you about? Yeah, can't get those. Okay, so you got 2 of those in there. And then you also have 2 of these, 2 fancy roller skates. So you flip a coin. If heads, you draw 3 cards. Simple as that. It's a risk, but it's an item card as opposed to a supporter card. There are very few item cards that actually let you draw cards. So if you can get heads with this, you will be at a nice advantage because having extra cards in your hand is a very good thing. It's more options. That's why you want to play trainer cards, by the way. I know they're not Pokemon, but they help you get set up. They help you get cards, they help you get what you need. They're really useful. And the fact that this is an item means you can play as many of those as you want during your turn without having to worry about it. Alright, I think there's only one other type of trainer card in here, and it's called Energy Switch. Oh, there's 2 of those letters, by the way, and there's 2 of these. And they let you move a basic energy card from one of your Pokemon to another of your Pokemon. That can be useful if, let's say, you retreated something for something else and you want to take some of the energy from that Pokemon to the new Pokemon. Or something's about to get knocked out, you can use the energy switch to take an energy off of it and then put it somewhere else. Since you can only attach 1 energy per turn, this can sometimes give you a surprise advantage, and it's a really decent card. It's not for every deck, but definitely consider using it here. I definitely recommend it. Well, anyway, you know what? Really, aside from all those trainer cards in here, the only other thing you need to know about this deck is there are 10 grass energy and 8 fairy energy in here. And typically you'll want to run, I don't know, around that many energy. As you get more card drawing cards, you can get by with a lot less, but you really need to have your deck refined for that. That's when you start entering the competitive level. So, what do I think about this deck? I think it's actually alright. I mean, again, you're not going to be getting like the best deck in the world. This is a starting point. This is where you want to begin. Or at least it's an option. Again, you could get the this deck right here, or any of the other recent theme decks. Yeah, Dark Hammer. But it's definitely a good starting spot, and it gives you just sort of a basic idea of where to begin. Now, if you were to expand on this, I would recommend trying to go with more evolutions. Get some Xerneas from, what is the deck, or the set? It's just the X and Y set, actually. In fact, there's even a deck that has Xerneas as well. Probably cut the Clefable, maybe cut the Victory Bell line as well, and then just try to expand from there. Maybe get some of the evolutions for things like a Slacking or a Breloom, that could be helpful. But yeah, that's the deck. I hope you enjoyed this. I apologize it was a bit lengthy, but I did want to kind of give a lot of you an idea of how to play. And, you know, kind of see all the cards and see what they do and see if this deck is right for you. Again, you can buy these decks pretty much anywhere that they sell Pokemon cards. And you can also have a chance at winning not just this deck, the Enchanted Echo one, not just this Dark Hammer theme deck, but even a full booster box of 36 packs that you can use to help improve your deck even further. And you can do that by following the link in the description. But remember, it only lasts until October 6, 2014. So definitely want to check that out. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you next time for the Dark Hammer theme deck box opening thingy. Yeah, see you next time, everyone.